What if the most powerful moment in your life was simply being asked to dance? He was just a single dad in dirty overalls, showing up to a school gala to make his daughter smile. She was the town's quiet mystery, a billionaire mom trying to heal from a world that never saw her for who she really was. And in a room full of polished shoes and polite small talk, she chose him. This isn't a story about fame or fortune. It's a story about kindness, about second chances, and about how sometimes love finds you when you're not trying to impress anyone. If heartfelt stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You'll get more stories just like this. Stories that warm the heart and make you believe in something good again. Now, let's begin. A single dad in dirty overalls came to the school gala. The billionaire mom chose to dance with him. The town of Maplewood stirred gently beneath a canopy of amber leaves and drifting October wind. Mornings here smelled like pine needles and damp earth, and the sound of life came in humble forms. Rustling squirrels, screen doors creaking open, the low hum of tractors warming up. It was the kind of town where time didn't rush. It simply passed. At the edge of town, just off a winding gravel road, stood a small garage with chipped red paint and a hand-painted wooden sign, Turner's Auto Repair. It didn't look like much, just a two-bay building, a rusty vending machine outside, and a faded American flag fluttering from a metal pole. But it was the heartbeat of Eli Turner's life. Eli stood beneath the hood of a 2004 Ford pickup, sleeves rolled up, fingers blackened with oil. The autumn breeze brought in a sharp chill, but he barely noticed. His hands moved with quiet focus, tightening a bolt here, adjusting a hose there. He'd been working since before sunrise, like most days. Inside the shop, a radio played soft country music beneath the sound of clinking tools. A coffee thermos sat on a stool next to him, steam long since gone. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the clock. 7:42 a.m. He smiled to himself. The bell above the office door jingled. A small pair of pink sneakers raced through the gravel and stopped short at the edge of the workbay. "Daddy!" a little voice called out. Eli turned, grinning. "Hey, Peanut!" Sophie Turner, age 7 and already the light of his world, held out a folded piece of bright yellow paper. Her backpack sagged off one shoulder, and a maple leaf clung to the side of her tangled hair. "Miss Kelly gave this to everyone. It's about the Harvest Gala," she said, beaming with the kind of excitement only a child could muster before 8 in the morning. Eli wiped his hands again and knelt to her height. "Harvest Gala, huh?" Sophie nodded eagerly. "It's next Friday night. There's music and food, and parents get to come and dance with their kids. And there's this big light-up dance floor." "Wow," Eli said, taking the flyer. "Sounds fancy." Sophie watched him, eyes wide and hopeful. "Will you come with me?" Eli hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because he could already feel the discomfort creeping in, the judgmental looks, the worn jeans he'd probably have to wear, the fact that he hadn't owned a suit since his wedding day, and even that one hadn't survived the flood in 15. He didn't want Sophie to be embarrassed. More than that, he didn't want her to see him feeling out of place. "I don't know, sweet pea," he said gently. "I might have to work late that night." Her face fell just a little, not enough to cry, but enough to crush something soft inside him. "But it's okay," she said quickly, putting on a brave smile. "I can still go. Maybe Miss Kelly will let me dance with her." Eli looked at her long and hard, then stood and tapped the end of her nose with a grease-smudged finger. "We'll see, all right? No promises, but I'll try." She nodded and gave him a quick hug around the waist before racing back to the school bus waiting down the lane. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent and turned the trees into a stained-glass cathedral of fire and gold, Eli sat on the porch steps outside the garage. His elbows rested on his knees, the yellow flyer still in his hands. He thought about Sophie and her unshakable faith in him. Thought about how somehow she still saw him as someone who could do anything. Even walk into a school gymnasium filled with polished shoes and designer dresses, wearing oil-streaked boots and a $14 haircut. Maybe he couldn't give her everything, but he could show up. That counted for something, didn't it? His phone buzzed beside him. A message from his friend Jack popped up. "Heard they got some big city CEO lady moving into the Hawthorne place. Hope she don't try to buy up the whole town." Eli chuckled to himself. The gossip in Maplewood traveled faster than the wind. He didn't care much for who had money and who didn't. People were people. Either they were kind or they weren't. And he had no interest in those who weren't. He stuffed the flyer into his back pocket and stood up, stretching his sore back. As he walked inside, the bell above the door jingled again. That evening, he picked Sophie up from after-school care and brought her home. They shared grilled cheese sandwiches and canned tomato soup, and she talked nonstop about the gala, how the gym would have fairy lights, how Daniel Hawthorne, the new boy, had 2 left feet, and how she wanted to wear a sparkly blue dress. Eli listened, smiling, her voice washing over him like warm water. "You think I can wear my old overalls to the gala?" he teased. Sophie narrowed her eyes. "Only if you wash them first." He laughed. "Fair enough." She reached for his hand across the table, her tiny fingers wrapping around his grease-stained ones. "I don't care what you wear, Daddy, as long as you're there." And in that moment, with a paper napkin tucked into her shirt and soup on her chin, she looked more like his late wife than she ever had before. It made his throat tighten. He didn't say a word. He just squeezed her hand and whispered, "I'll be there." And this time he meant it. The rain started just past 3 o'clock that afternoon. Quiet at first, then harder, as if the sky had made up its mind. Maplewood's winding back roads glistened beneath the storm, maple leaves sticking to windshields like forgotten letters. Vivian Hawthorne squinted through her windshield as the wipers squeaked in protest. Her Tesla had gone completely silent, the dashboard blinking red warnings like a Christmas tree of frustration. She pulled to the side of the road and sighed, more out of disbelief than panic. Her GPS had directed her through this forgotten stretch of tree-lined nothing to avoid traffic, and now she was stranded on the edge of nowhere. Typical. Vivian tapped her phone screen. No signal. Not a single bar. She glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing her own reflection. Hair pinned up in a bun, pearl earrings still in from a Zoom meeting that morning, and her expression, carefully neutral, but tired. Always tired lately. Daniel stirred in the back seat, headphones slipping from one ear. "Mom, are we stuck?" She smiled over her shoulder. Not stuck, just paused. His eyebrows lifted skeptically, but he didn't argue. She admired that about him. Daniel had inherited her skepticism, but his father's calm. That calm had come in handy lately. Vivian pulled her blazer tighter as she stepped out into the rain. She popped the hood, stared blankly at the machinery inside, and cursed under her breath. She might be a top-tier CEO, but engines were a foreign language. That's when she saw headlights. A battered old truck pulled up slowly behind her car. It looked like something out of a different decade. Silver with streaks of rust and a familiar Turner's Auto Repair decal barely clinging to the driver's side door. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing overalls soaked from the knees down. A ball cap shaded his face and his boots splashed through the puddles without hesitation. "You all right, ma'am?" he called, voice steady, kind. Vivian hesitated. In another life, she might have been suspicious, but this man didn't look threatening, just worn in. Real. "I think the battery's dead," she said, folding her arms. He walked over, peered beneath the hood like he was reading a book he'd memorized. "Yup, seen this before. These models tend to glitch in heavy rain. Something with the insulation." He glanced at her. "Mind if I give it a try?" She nodded, stepping back. He worked quickly, unrolling cables, attaching a portable jump starter, tapping something beneath the battery casing. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap, and yet he didn't flinch. Vivian watched him work, strangely transfixed. There was a quiet rhythm to him, a practiced ease. Not rushed, not flashy, just steady. From inside the truck, a little girl leaned out the window. "Daddy, you want your sandwich now?" "Hold on, baby," he called back, not missing a beat. "Helping someone." Vivian turned. "That's your daughter?" "Yep, Sophie." He wiped his hands and pressed a button beneath the dash. Her Tesla blinked back to life. "You're good to go." She blinked. "Just like that?" He smiled. "Just like that?" She reached into her coat for her wallet. "At least let me pay you. This would have cost $100 with roadside assistance." He stepped back, shaking his head. "No need. Not the kind of help I charge for." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were tired but kind, the kind of gaze that saw through pretension. Because I want my kid to grow up watching people help each other. That's got to start somewhere. Something tightened in her chest. Not pain, not quite sadness. Just the ache of being reminded what genuine kindness looked like. She hesitated before saying, "You have no idea how rare that is where I come from." He shrugged. "Maybe, but here, it's still pretty normal." She didn't know what to say to that. He tipped his cap. "Take care, ma'am." As he turned to go, she caught herself blurting, "Wait, what's your name?" He paused. "Eli. Eli Turner." She nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." He nodded once, then jogged back to his truck. Back in her car, Daniel peered up at her. Was he a mechanic? "Something like that," she murmured. "Nice guy." Vivian started the engine, eyes still following the old truck in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," she whispered. "He was." That night after Daniel went to bed, Vivian stood on the back porch of her new house, looking out at the moonlit forest that bordered her property. The house was beautiful, silent, and empty in all the ways that made her feel more alone than the Manhattan high-rise ever had. She kept thinking about Eli Turner, not because he was charming, he wasn't, not in any polished way, but because he hadn't hesitated, hadn't looked at her clothes or her car or her silence with suspicion or judgment. He'd just helped, and he'd done it for his daughter's sake. Vivian let out a slow breath. In her world, everyone wanted something. Every handshake led to a meeting. Every compliment was a prelude to a pitch. But that man, he hadn't even asked her name. That night, she made a silent promise to herself. If she ever saw him again, she'd remember that moment. And maybe, just maybe, she'd return the favor in her own way. What she didn't know then was that she wouldn't have to wait long. The first days of October always brought a special stillness to Maplewood Elementary. The playground, once buzzing with squeals and soccer balls, grew quieter as the chill set in, and golden leaves fell like feathers from the sky. The children's breath came in little clouds, and the scent of wet bark and wood chips filled the air. Vivian stood by the black iron gate, a to-go coffee in hand, her tailored coat drawn close against the breeze. It was morning drop-off, and around her, clusters of parents chatted in cozy little circles, most of them in puffer vests or fleece jackets, waving to their kids and one another with the ease of long-standing familiarity. She was not one of them. Though Vivian had lived in Maplewood for just over a month now, she still felt like she was walking on the outer edge of a snow globe, able to see everything clearly, yet separated by something invisible but thick. Her boots were too polished. Her hair always looked too perfect. And while the other moms traded homemade muffin recipes and complaints about rising milk prices, no one quite knew what to say to the woman from the city with the expensive car. Vivian didn't blame them. She was aware of the quiet way eyes slid toward her, then quickly away. She'd been the outsider before. It didn't sting as much anymore, but it didn't stop her from noticing. "Daniel," she said gently as her son adjusted his backpack, "remember to eat your fruit at lunch, okay?" He gave her a wry look. "I'm not 5, Mom." She raised an eyebrow. "I packed blueberries. That's a high-effort fruit." That earned her a reluctant smile. "Thanks." Daniel was a quiet boy, observant. He rarely talked about what happened at school, but she could tell things hadn't been easy. A few boys had made fun of his sneakers on the first day. Another time, he'd come home unusually silent, then admitted someone had said he was weird for not knowing how to catch a football. She was still learning how to be the kind of mother who didn't solve everything with a meeting or a budget increase. Here, none of that mattered. "Hey, Daniel!" a cheerful voice called out. They both turned. A little girl with strawberry blonde curls and a toothy grin bounded up to him, her pink corduroy jacket slightly askew, and a glittery unicorn backpack bouncing with every step. "Sophie," Daniel said, clearly surprised. "Hi." Vivian recognized her immediately, the girl from the roadside, Eli Turner's daughter. Sophie beamed, completely at ease. "You want to sit with me at lunch today? We're going to build a cookie fort with the graham crackers. Miss Kelly says we can have marshmallows on Friday if we behave all week." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." Sophie turned to Vivian and waved, her face bright. "Hi, you're Daniel's mom, right?" Vivian blinked, then smiled back. "I am." And you must be Sophie. Yup, she said proudly. My dad fixes cars. He says Daniel is polite, which is rare in boys. Vivian chuckled, genuinely amused. I agree with your dad. Sophie's bus arrived just then, and she grabbed Daniel's hand without hesitation. Come on, let's get the back seat before Ben and Caleb do. Daniel looked at his mom, uncertain. Vivian gave him a nod. Go ahead. He followed Sophie onto the bus, and just like that, he was gone, laughing at something she'd whispered as they disappeared down the aisle. Vivian stood in place for a moment, watching the bus pull away with a strange flutter in her chest. It wasn't quite joy, not yet, but it was something close, something warm and unexpected. That afternoon, Vivian returned earlier than usual to pick up Daniel. She stood outside the gate again, only this time, she wasn't entirely alone. Hey there, stranger, a familiar voice said behind her. She turned, startled, then smiled slowly. Eli stood beside her, wiping his hands with a blue shop rag, his overalls streaked with the day's labor. His face was flushed from the cold, and a smudge of grease marked his cheekbone. He looked the same as that rainy afternoon, and yet different somehow, more present, more real. I didn't expect to see you here, she said. Garage is closed early, he replied. Sophie wanted to show me the pumpkin she painted today. It's got glitter eyes and pipe cleaner arms. Vivian laughed softly. Sounds terrifying. She's got a flair for the dramatic, Eli said with a smirk. They stood side by side as children poured out of the school building, their backpacks bouncing and their voices echoing across the lot. Sophie spotted them both and came running, cheeks pink with excitement. Daddy, look! She held up a paper pumpkin smeared with purple paint. It's you! See the hair! That's hair, Eli teased. She giggled, hugging his waist. Just behind her, Daniel walked out, slower but smiling. When he saw Vivian and Eli standing together, he blinked, then looked up at his mother, clearly curious. Vivian met his gaze and gave the faintest shrug. Yes, her eyes seemed to say. It's him. The man from the side of the road? Eli noticed the silent exchange but didn't press. Instead, he turned to Daniel and said, Hey there, champ. Sophie says you're pretty good with cookies. Daniel gave a sheepish grin. She's a good builder. Sounds like a solid team, Eli said. Vivian watched them, something stirring deep inside her. It wasn't romantic yet, not fully, but there was something in the way Eli stood close without crowding, spoke kindly without pretense, and looked at her son like he mattered. She wasn't used to that. Hey, Eli said almost hesitantly, you and Daniel doing anything this Friday night? Vivian raised a brow. Why? Sophie's got this harvest gala thing at school. I promised her I'd come, but, you know, not exactly a tuxedo guy. Vivian tilted her head. You're not inviting me to the gala, are you? Eli laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. No, not like that. Just figured, if you're there, we might not be the only ones out of place. Vivian considered it. A week ago, she might have said no out of instinct. But now? She looked at her son, now deep in conversation with Sophie, his face brighter than she'd seen in days. I'll think about it, she said with a soft smile. Eli nodded, as if that was more than enough. And in a way it was. Maplewood Elementary had never looked quite so magical. By the time the sun dipped below the ridgeline, the school gymnasium had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Strings of warm white lights crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a soft golden hue on the polished floor below. Paper lanterns and harvest colors swayed with every draft, and long tables held trays of pumpkin cookies, apple cider, and finger foods arranged with surprising elegance. The smell of cinnamon and floor wax mingled in the air, familiar and oddly comforting. Vivian stood just inside the entrance, her heels clicking gently against the hardwood as she looked around. She dressed down, at least by her standards, wearing a navy sweater dress and suede ankle boots instead of anything tailored or branded. Her hair was pinned back simply, and she wore no jewelry except a pair of tiny gold studs. She didn't want to draw attention. But of course she did. People glanced as she walked in, not with malice, just curiosity, the kind that wrapped itself in whispers and half smiles. Vivian had learned long ago how to let that glance slide off her shoulders like rain on a raincoat. She smiled politely at the PTA president, exchanged a nod with the vice principal, and scanned the room for her son. Daniel was in the corner, building a leaning tower of cookies with Sophie and two other children. He looked up and waved when he saw her, and that was all the reassurance she needed. From across the room, she spotted Eli. He was standing alone near the refreshment table, holding two paper cups of cider. His hair had been combed, probably with nothing but water, and his overalls were clean, the creases freshly ironed. He looked every bit the same man who'd stopped in the rain to help her on the side of the road. No polish, no pretense. Just steady. Their eyes met. And for a moment, the room faded into softness. Vivian walked toward him, slowly, deliberately. She wasn't entirely sure why her palms were damp or why her heart beat faster with each step. It was just Eli after all. And yet, not just Eli. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her a cup of cider. She accepted it with a smile. "Thanks. You clean up well." He grinned. "Don't get used to it. This outfit comes out once a year, usually for funerals or county fairs." Vivian laughed, surprised at how natural it felt. "You nervous?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room. "A little," she admitted. "Feels like a high school dance where I don't know which group I belong to." "Join the club," he said. "I'm pretty sure half these parents think I work the janitor shift." Vivian sipped the cider, eyes twinkling. "Do you?" "Nope," he said. "But I'm flattered they think I'm that responsible." She chuckled. "You're better than responsible." That earned her a look, one of quiet appreciation, maybe even surprise. Before either of them could say more, the DJ announced the start of the first dance. A soft, instrumental tune floated into the air, something simple and warm. Children rushed to the floor, dragging their parents by the hands. Laughter rose like bubbles in the golden light. Eli looked toward the crowd. "Sophie's gonna want her dance." Vivian nodded. "And Daniel's pretending he doesn't care, but I know he's waiting." They both turned to go, but then something unexpected happened. The music slowed, and people began to pair off. It was one of those songs designed to make the grown-ups move, a gentle waltz with a whisper of nostalgia in its chords. Vivian heard it before she felt it, the slight hush that fell over the crowd as some parents stepped back, unsure whether to participate. Then out of the corner of her eyes, she noticed something else. 3 different men, all approaching from different corners of the room. One was the local dentist, immaculately dressed and carrying a bouquet of tiny sunflowers. Another was the town's junior councilman, all polished shoes and too much cologne. And the last, a freshly divorced banker, had been trying to talk to her at drop-off for weeks. Vivian's stomach turned. It wasn't that they were rude, it was that none of them saw her. Not really. They saw something about her. Her name, her job, her house. But they didn't see her. But someone had. Someone still was. Eli hadn't moved. He stood quietly, not pushing forward like the others, not retreating either. Just watching her, cider still in hand, giving her the space to decide. Vivian took a breath, then stepped toward him. She held out her hand, voice calm and sure. "Would you dance with me?" His eyes widened, just slightly. He glanced behind him as if checking to make sure she was speaking to him and not someone just out of frame. "Me?" She smiled. "Yes, you." For a second he said nothing. Then he set down his cup and took her hand. Rough, warm, honest. "I don't really dance," he murmured. "I don't really care," she whispered. They stepped onto the floor, awkward at first, their movements unsure. But something shifted between them as the music carried on. Vivian let herself be led, and Eli moved slowly, carefully, his palms steady at the small of her back. People were watching. Vivian knew it. She could feel their stares. But for once in her life, she didn't mind. She was dancing with someone who hadn't asked where she was from, what she owned, or who she knew. Just someone who'd once knelt in the rain to help her and never asked for a thing in return. And that somehow felt more meaningful than anything else in the room. For a moment, all Vivian could hear was the music. It wasn't loud or grand, just a soft waltz that floated over the wooden floors like a whisper from another time. The laughter and chatter of the gym faded to the background. Even the flickering lights above, strung together like a galaxy of paper stars, seemed to dim in reverence. All she saw was him. Eli's hand was warm against hers, his other resting gently on her back, as if afraid to press too close. He held her like she was made of something fragile. Glass, maybe. Or maybe he just wasn't used to holding anything at all. Vivian hadn't danced like this in years. She'd been to galas, yes, events where champagne flowed and conversations sparkled with ambition. But those dances had been rehearsed, performed. This was different. There was nothing practiced about Eli Turner, and that was what made it feel real. "I think I'm stepping on your foot," he muttered. "You're not," she smiled. "I might be." "Then I must have strong shoes." He chuckled under his breath, and the sound was low, rough, almost bashful. It didn't match the tall, strong frame of the man she danced with, but it suited the softness in his eyes. They moved slowly, uncertain but in sync. Around them, no one interrupted. The other couples had melted away, leaving a ring of onlookers who pretended not to stare. Vivian noticed the whispers. She always did. But for once, she didn't care. Because Eli was looking at her like she was just a woman. Not a name, not a paycheck, not a headline. Just a woman in a dress, dancing with a man who smelled faintly of motor oil and autumn wind. She tilted her head slightly, voice low. "Do you always dance like this?" He shook his head. "Only when forced, or bribed with cider." "Well, I hope Sophie's grateful. You're making her look very cool." He smiled. "That's all I ever want." Vivian felt something stir in her chest. An ache, maybe. Or a reminder. A reminder that love, in its truest form, was rarely loud or flashy. Sometimes it wore overalls and carried lunch in a toolbox. Sometimes it said less and meant more. The song ended, slowly, reluctantly. Eli stepped back, giving her space. "Thank you," she said softly. He scratched the back of his neck, glancing away. "You're welcome." The gym lights brightened a little as the DJ switched to something upbeat. Children poured back onto the dance floor like confetti, spinning and shouting and dragging their parents into chaos. The moment between Vivian and Eli faded into the background noise like breath on glass. Sophie came running, cheeks flushed. "Daddy, did you really dance with her?" Eli grinned. "I sure did." She turned to Vivian, eyes wide. "You danced with my dad? He never dances." Vivian crouched to her level. "Well, I feel very lucky then." Sophie beamed, then grabbed Eli's hand. "You have to come dance with me next." He let himself be dragged toward the center of the floor, giving Vivian a sheepish shrug over his shoulder. She laughed, stepping back toward the edge of the gym to let them be. Vivian stood near the refreshments table, watching as Eli and Sophie twirled under the lights, their movements clumsy and joyful. Daniel had joined in too, laughing with two other boys as he tried to match their rhythm. She let the paper cup of cider warm her hands as something quieter settled in her chest. Something peaceful. "Didn't expect to see you dancing tonight," a voice said. Vivian turned to find Nancy Clemens, head of the PTA, standing beside her with a polite smile and raised brows. Nancy wore a plaid blazer and a chunky necklace that glinted beneath the lights. She always smelled like lavender and coffee. "I didn't expect it either," Vivian replied with a smile. Nancy tilted her head. "You and Eli Turner. That's surprising." Vivian didn't answer right away. "Is it?" "Well," Nancy said, voice lowering conspiratorially, "he's not exactly your type. Not that it's any of my business, of course." Vivian held her gaze, smile still soft. "I suppose kindness doesn't really have a type." Nancy blinked. "Of course. Yes. I just mean, he keeps to himself. Doesn't attend these events. I didn't either, until tonight." Nancy opened her mouth to respond but thought better of it. She gave a tight smile and wandered away, her heels clicking across the floor. Vivian turned back toward the dance floor, her expression unchanged but her thoughts stirred. She'd grown used to that look, the one Nancy gave her. It was the same one she'd received in boardrooms when she pushed too hard, in charity galas when she declined to gossip, in interviews when she was asked how she balanced motherhood with being a CEO. The look that said, "You don't belong." But standing there watching a single dad spin his daughter beneath handmade lanterns, Vivian had never felt more certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the gala wound down and parents gathered their things, Vivian found herself outside on the front steps of the school, the autumn air crisp against her skin. Eli joined her, holding Sophie's coat in one hand. "Thanks for not laughing at me back there," he said. She looked up at him. "Why would I laugh?" I was nervous, like high school dance nervous. Could have fooled me, she said. You were perfect. He gave a soft, incredulous laugh. That's the first time anyone said that to me while I was wearing overalls. Vivian smiled. She didn't say the thing she was thinking. Maybe no one ever looked close enough before. Instead, she stepped aside as Sophie and Daniel came bounding down the steps. You kids ready? Eli asked. Can Daniel come over tomorrow? Sophie asked. We're going to finish the cookie fort. I'll text his mom, he replied. Daniel looked up at Vivian, hopeful. She nodded. As long as he helps clean up. Shirmachim. The kids cheered and ran ahead to the parking lot. Eli lingered. Thanks for saying yes, he said. Vivian met his gaze. Thanks for making it so easy. And with that, they parted. But something had changed. In a town full of quiet eyes and quiet judgments, two unlikely people had taken a small, brave step toward each other. And though neither of them could say what it meant just yet, the dance had started something neither of them could quite name. Not yet, but soon. The next afternoon brought a soft, persistent drizzle, the kind of rain that didn't demand attention, but soaked everything just the same. The streets of Maplewood glistened in dull gray, puddles forming quietly at the edges of curbs. Leaves clung to windshields and shop windows like tired confetti. Vivian Hawthorne stood just outside Turner's Auto Repair, umbrella in one hand, a Tupperware container cradled in the other. She hesitated at the door, unsure whether she was being bold or ridiculous. Inside, the sound of clanking tools and low rock music filtered through the cracked window. It was Daniel's idea, really. He and Sophie had spent the better part of Saturday morning constructing the world's messiest cookie castle, and laughing so hard Vivian had to step away just to let them have their moment. That kind of laughter didn't come easily to her son, and when Eli offered to let Daniel hang around the garage while he worked, the boy lit up in a way she hadn't seen in months. So here she was. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The garage smelled like grease and metal and something warmer, maybe coffee. Eli was bent under the hood of an old Chevrolet, sleeves rolled up, back damp with effort. He looked up as she entered, wiping his hands on a red shop towel. Well, this is a surprise, he said, smiling. Storm blow you off course? Vivian lifted the container. I brought lasagna, payment for entertaining my son all afternoon. He arched a brow. You cook? Poorly, she admitted, but this one's from an Italian deli in Brattleboro, so it's almost like I did. Eli chuckled, walking over. That's good. I was going to pretend I had lunch left, but I didn't. Vivian followed him to a small break area at the back of the garage. A couple of folding chairs, a microwave that had seen better decades, and a chipped table with two mismatched mugs sitting side by side. It was nothing fancy, but it was real. She set the container down, and he grabbed two forks from a drawer. For a moment, they sat quietly, eating warm lasagna, while the rain tapped rhythmically on the metal roof. Vivian looked around. This place reminds me of my dad's workshop. He used to fix up lawnmowers in the garage on weekends. Had a radio that only got one station and always smelled like gas and coffee. Eli nodded. Sounds like a good man. He was, she said softly. Simple, honest. He never made much money, but people trusted him. That's the kind of wealth you don't lose in a market crash, Eli said. Vivian smiled at that. I think he would have liked this place. Eli leaned back in his chair, fork resting between bites. So, what brought you to Maplewood? Really? She paused, the question catching her in that vulnerable space between comfort and truth. I needed quiet, she said finally. After the divorce, Daniel needed space to be a kid again. And she took a breath. I needed to remember who I was before my life became meetings and lawsuits and scheduled happiness. Eli didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes steady, like the rain outside didn't exist. It's strange, she continued. You work so hard for things you think will make you feel safe. The right address, the right school, the right clothes. And then one day your husband looks at you like you're a business partner who's underperforming, and you realize none of it kept you safe at all. Eli's voice was quiet. I get that. Vivian looked at him, searching. Do you? He nodded slowly. My wife passed 5 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 38. Thought we had more time, But that's the kind of thing time doesn't ask your permission for. Vivian's expression softened. I'm sorry, Eli. She made me promise two things before she went, he said. Raise Sophie to be kind, and don't let grief turn me cold. Vivian felt the ache settle in her chest like a familiar weight. That's a beautiful promise. He glanced over at her. It's hard some days, but Sophie makes it easier. They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the dripping window, like it held answers they hadn't yet figured out how to ask for. Then softly she said, Thank you for dancing with me. Eli looked surprised, then a little shy. You're the one who asked. I meant it, though, she continued. It wasn't just about the music. It was something I didn't know I missed. He set down his fork. You know, most people in this town still see you as the woman with the fancy car and the guarded smile. Vivian met his gaze. And what do you see? Eli didn't smile. He didn't look away. I see a woman who shows up in the rain, who doesn't mind sitting in a greasy garage eating deli lasagna, and who makes her kid feel safe enough to laugh like he doesn't remember what it felt like to be hurt. Vivian blinked once, then again. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of honesty, of breath, of something just beginning to bloom. She rose slowly. I should go. Daniel's probably reorganizing your socket set. Eli stood too, walking her to the door. Don't worry, Sophie's worse. At the entrance she paused, umbrella poised but unopened. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. He leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. If you want to. I do, she said. And with that, she stepped into the rain. Sunday morning dawned cold and quiet, with a pale sky the color of old parchment. Maplewood was still asleep, the streets wrapped in a blanket of fog, softening the edges of everything. Rooftops, mailboxes, even the sound of the church bell in the distance. Vivian stood at the kitchen window, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug Daniel had painted for her in first grade. The handle was crooked and the glaze was chipped, but it was the one she always reached for on mornings like this. Daniel was still asleep, curled up under 2 layers of fleece blankets. The silence in the house was rare, and she let herself enjoy it until her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Claire Melrose, one of the PTA mothers she barely knew, but who had made several overtures lately in the form of polite conversation and well-meaning gossip. Morning. Just saw that photo from the gala. You and the mechanic, huh? Interesting choice. Call me if you want to talk. Vivian stared at the message, the smiley face at the end somehow more biting than cheerful. She opened the link Claire had attached, a photo snapped mid-dance, probably from someone's phone. She and Eli were in the center of the frame, his arm around her waist, her head slightly tilted toward him. They looked like a couple, a real one. And suddenly she felt like she couldn't breathe. Later that morning, at the Maplewood General Store, the buzz was subtle but unmistakable. Vivian entered to grab milk and eggs, but the moment the bell above the door jingled, heads turned. A woman by the register lowered her voice mid-sentence. Another offered a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Vivian walked past a display of pumpkins, pretending not to hear. Vivian Hawthorne, one of the voices whispered, not unkind but curious. She's dating Eli Turner now? She danced with him, another corrected. She could do a lot better, a third chimed in. Vivian's grip on the basket tightened. She kept her posture straight, her face unreadable. This wasn't her first time walking through a room where people pretended not to talk about her, but it was the first time she cared. Meanwhile, at Turner's Auto Repair, Eli leaned against the open hood of a Subaru with one boot resting on a crate of tools. Jack Hartley, his old friend and occasional fishing partner, was sitting nearby, sipping from a styrofoam cup. You know you made the front page of the PTA rumor mill, right? Jack said with a grin. Eli didn't look up. I figured something was coming. They were staring like I brought a deer into the dance floor. Jack chuckled. Vivian Hawthorne. Didn't see that one coming. Eli shrugged. We talked. We danced. That's all. Jack gave him a look. Sure, but they're making it sound like you proposed marriage between the cheese trays. Eli sighed, wiping his hands with a towel. People in this town love their stories. Doesn't mean any of it's true. Doesn't mean it won't hurt, Jack added, softer now. Eli didn't respond. He didn't have to. The truth sat heavy in his chest. He liked Vivian, more than liked, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. That afternoon, Vivian sat on the back porch, legs curled beneath her, Daniel reading beside her. She'd been thinking about the gala, the lasagna, the way Eli had looked at her like she wasn't someone to be dissected or managed, just seen. She wasn't used to being seen. She was used to being assessed, measured, judged. She was halfway through her third unread paragraph of a novel when Daniel spoke. "Mom?" She looked over. "Yeah?" He didn't look up. "Sophie said some kids at school were saying stuff about you and her dad." Vivian sat straighter. "What kind of stuff?" Daniel hesitated. "Just weird stuff. That he's not good enough. That you're too rich." Vivian exhaled slowly. "And what did you say?" "I said they didn't know anything." He looked up then. "Is it true? Are you two dating?" Vivian hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wasn't sure which version of the truth was safest to share. "We're spending time together," she said. "He's kind and honest. And he makes me laugh." Daniel nodded. "He's nice to me too." She reached over, brushed his hair from his forehead. "People talk when they don't understand something. That doesn't mean we stop living." Daniel looked thoughtful. "Okay," she smiled. "Okay?" He shrugged. "As long as you're happy." Vivian pulled him into a side hug, letting his small frame lean into her for a moment longer than usual. That evening, she drove out to the garage. The rain had cleared, leaving the pavement damp and shimmering under the twilight sky. A faint chill clung to the air as she stepped out of the car and walked toward the office where the lights were still on. Eli looked up from behind the desk, his expression unreadable. "Hey, hey," she said, stepping inside. He didn't stand, but he didn't look away either. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I heard some things today." He nodded. "Me too." "I don't regret dancing with you," she said simply. He studied her face. "But," she hesitated, "but I didn't expect it to turn into a thing. I wasn't trying to make a statement." Eli leaned back. "Neither was I." They sat in silence. Then Vivian added, "This, whatever it is between us, it doesn't have to be loud or public. It just has to be real." Eli's eyes softened. "I can live with real." And just like that, the storm that had hovered around them began to quiet. Because when two people carry grief and hope in equal measure, sometimes all they need is someone to stand beside them, not above, not behind, just beside. The leaves began to fall faster after that. Within a week, the trees lining Maplewood's main street had turned from golden torches into bare silhouettes, and the sidewalks wore patchwork quilts of amber and rust. Wind curled around corners with a sharper bite, and the scent of chimney smoke and woodpiles marked the town's quiet shift into early November. Eli noticed it more in the stillness, how the world felt a little more distant now. So did Vivian. She hadn't come by the garage that week, not since their quiet talk after the whisper started. Not since she'd said the words, "It doesn't have to be loud, just real." He'd nodded, agreed, even meant it at the time. But reality had a way of tugging at old threads. On Wednesday, Sophie came home from school with a drawing in hand, her version of the Gala dance floor, complete with stick figure parents and a whole lot of glitter. "This is you and Miss Vivian," she said, pointing proudly to two figures dancing beneath a glowing paper moon. Eli smiled, then set it on the fridge. But he didn't say much else. That night, he stayed late at the shop, tinkering with a job he could have finished in half the time. Something in him didn't want to go home, didn't want to face the quiet that came after the kids fell asleep and the town shut down. Didn't want to admit he was waiting for a message that wasn't coming. Vivian, for her part, hadn't stopped thinking about him either. She'd told herself she needed space, time, just a few days to recalibrate after everything. The gossip, the pressure, the sense of being watched again, like she had been in every boardroom and banquet for the last 15 years. She had climbed so far up the ladder of success, only to find herself longing for the ground again. And Eli Turner, he was the ground. Steady, unpretentious, good. But the more she let herself drift toward him, the more exposed she felt. What if she pulled him into her world, only for it to break him the way it had broken others? What if kindness wasn't enough? On Friday afternoon, Vivian stood in the school pickup line, coat wrapped tight against the cold, watching as Sophie bounded toward her truck, chattering beside Daniel like nothing had changed. Eli wasn't there. Daniel slid into the passenger seat and buckled his seatbelt without a word. "Everything okay?" she asked. He nodded, looking out the window. "I think Sophie's sad." Vivian's hand stilled on the gear shift. "Why?" "She said her dad doesn't smile the same when you don't come around." Vivian didn't answer. Daniel turned to her. "Are you mad at him?" "No," she said quickly. "Not at all." "Then maybe you should call him," he said simply. And somehow that small, honest suggestion from a child struck harder than any adult opinion ever could. But Vivian didn't call that night. Instead, she sat in her office at home, surrounded by unopened books and half-finished notes on a new consulting project she wasn't sure she even cared about. The only light in the room came from the fireplace, flickering low and casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. She picked up her phone once, scrolled through old messages, stared at his name, then set it down again. She didn't know how to explain this feeling. Not quite fear, not quite doubt. Just the quiet, haunting knowledge that sometimes, when things are good, life has a way of breaking them before they're ready to bloom. At the garage, Eli closed up early Saturday afternoon. Sophie was staying the night at a friend's, and for once he had nowhere he needed to be. The silence in the shop was heavier without her chatter. The echo of his boots on concrete felt louder, more hollow. He sat at the small table in the break area, holding a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The photo of the dance, the one someone had printed and taped to the bulletin board, caught his eye. He took it down, folded it once, slipped it into a drawer, not because he regretted it, but because it hurt too much to see something that had felt real now feel so far away. The next day they ran into each other at Maplewood Books, a tiny shop tucked between the bakery and the barber. Vivian was reaching for a cookbook. Eli was standing at the counter, buying a puzzle for Sophie. Their eyes met. Both hesitated. "Hey," Eli said first, quiet but sincere. "Hi," Vivian answered, equally soft. There was an awkward pause. Two people standing in the kind of silence that carries too many unspoken things. "I haven't seen you around," he said. "I've been thinking," she replied. He nodded. "That's okay." "I didn't mean to disappear," she added. He offered a small smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't owe me anything." Vivian felt something tighten in her chest. "That's not how I feel." "Then how do you feel?" he asked, voice still gentle, still giving her space. She looked down at the book in her hand. "Like I'm scared of hurting you, of getting it wrong." Eli didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Getting it wrong is part of the deal. So is trying again." Vivian looked up, really looked. The man in front of her wasn't demanding. He wasn't posturing. He was just standing there offering nothing but honesty and a quiet willingness to stay, even when things got messy. "I'm not good at this," she admitted. "Neither am I," he said, "but I think we could be good for each other, if we let it be slow, if we let it be real." She breathed out. "Slow sounds nice." He nodded. "So does real." And in that tiny bookstore, beneath the warm scent of old pages and cinnamon muffins from next door, they didn't fix anything, but they didn't break it either. And that, for now, was enough. Saturday dawned clear and cool, with a blue sky stretched tight above Maplewood like fresh linen. The last leaves clung stubbornly to branches, golden and crisp, fluttering like little flags before winter stripped them bare. At the community park, the air smelled of damp grass and fallen acorns. Families had gathered for the annual Fall Field Day, a small-town tradition of sack races, apple bobbing, and thermoses full of hot cider. It was a modest event, but in Maplewood, it was the kind of thing that brought neighbors closer. Vivian stood near the check-in table, hands wrapped around a paper cup of cinnamon cider. Daniel was somewhere near the open field, partnering with Sophie for the three-legged race. From the sidelines, she could already hear their laughter. His lighter, hers squealing with delight. She let the sounds settle in her chest like warmth from a familiar blanket. "Looks like they're figuring each other out," Eli said, stepping beside her. Vivian turned, surprised to see him. He wore a denim jacket over his flannel shirt, hands tucked into the pockets of worn jeans. There was something grounded about him, like he was made of the earth beneath their feet. Reliable, unchanged by wind or whispers. I think Sophie's teaching him how to win without cheating, Vivian said, smiling. Eli chuckled. She's tough. Kind, but tough. They stood together in silence, watching their children stumble and laugh, arms flailing in rhythm as they tried to cross the finish line, still bound together at the ankle. Vivian leaned slightly toward him. Thank you for giving him this. The laughter. He looked at her then. Not surprised, not flattered. Just quiet. You gave it to him too, Eli said. You just forgot to hear it for a while. Later that afternoon, the kids gathered at a crafts table, faces smeared with face paint and fingers sticky with glue. Vivian and Eli stood beneath a sycamore tree, its branches arching like arms over the bench they shared. I wasn't sure you'd come today, she said after a pause. I almost didn't, he admitted. What changed your mind? He watched Sophie and Daniel laugh over a crooked popsicle stick house. They did, Vivian nodded slowly. I think they're healing each other. And we? He asked, only half teasing. We're figuring it out, she said honestly. Eli turned to her. I meant what I said at the bookstore. I don't need fast, I just need honest. Vivian let that sit for a moment. Honest is harder than it sounds, she said, especially when you've spent years building walls instead of homes. He glanced at her. Then let's build something slower. A fence, maybe. We'll figure out the house part later. She laughed, soft and surprised. You always talk in metaphors? Only when I'm nervous, he admitted. Vivian's eyes softened. You don't have to be. It was just before sunset when it happened. Daniel had wandered a little beyond the activity tents toward the edge of the park, chasing a rogue football that had rolled across the grass. The slope there dipped slightly, and the damp leaves made it slick. Eli spotted him just as Daniel's foot slid. There was no time to yell, only to run. Vivian turned just in time to see Eli dash across the lawn, feet pounding over grass and mud. He reached Daniel just as the boy stumbled again, catching him by the arm and pulling him upright. Hey, I got you, Eli said, breathless. Daniel's face was flushed, his jacket smeared with mud. His eyes were wide, not scared, just surprised. I'm okay, he said. I know, Eli replied, brushing the leaves from his shoulder. Still, best to be safe. Vivian reached them seconds later, heart pounding. Daniel looked between them, then back up at Eli. Thanks, he said simply. And then without prompting, he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around Eli's waist. Eli froze for half a second. Then he returned the hug, firm, careful, real. It wasn't the kind of embrace built from obligation. It was the kind you didn't plan for, the kind that came from trust. When Daniel finally stepped back, he said something so quiet Vivian almost didn't hear it. I wish you were my dad. The words hung in the air like mist, gentle but impossible to ignore. Vivian's breath caught. Eli crouched to meet Daniel's gaze, his voice steady but gentle. I can't be your dad, kiddo, but I can be someone who's always around when it counts. If you want that. Daniel nodded. I do. Eli ruffled his hair. Then we're square. On the way home, Vivian drove in thoughtful silence while Daniel stared out the window, face serene in a way she hadn't seen since the divorce. His grip on the edge of his seat had loosened. His shoulders, usually drawn in with tension, had relaxed. He's really nice, Daniel said suddenly. Eli. Yes, Vivian replied. He is. Do you like him? She paused, eyes still on the road. I do. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You should let yourself be happy, Mom. I think he already knows how to help people feel that way. Vivian blinked hard, the road ahead suddenly shimmering a little more than it should. That night she stood at the kitchen sink, watching the lights of town flicker through the trees. Maplewood wasn't perfect. It whispered too much, watched too closely. But in the end, it always came back to the people who stayed, the ones who showed up when it counted. She reached for her phone, typed a message, paused, then hit send. Thank you. For running toward him, not away. For always being steady. I see it. I see you. V. The school auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. It was the annual Maplewood Elementary Fall fundraiser, the kind of event where plastic folding chairs lined a makeshift stage and handmade banners with slightly crooked letters spelled out, Thank you for helping us grow. Vivian sat in the second row beside Daniel, a program booklet folded neatly on her lap. She wore a soft gray sweater, understated earrings, and her hair in a loose braid that made her look younger than usual, gentler somehow. Daniel leaned into her shoulder. "Are you nervous?" She looked at him. "A little." "You don't look it." Vivian smiled. She'd given speeches to rooms full of shareholders, to national press, to Congress once. But this tiny town auditorium filled with parents, children, and paper crafts, felt more intimate, and in a way more important. Eli stood a few rows behind with Sophie, their eyes occasionally meeting hers. It had been 2 days since she'd sent the message. He hadn't replied with words, just a nod the next time they crossed paths. But it had been enough to let her know she wasn't alone. The principal, a warm-faced woman with a fondness for holiday pins, stepped up to the podium and welcomed the crowd. A few light jokes, a round of applause for the PTA. Then came the highlight of the evening, recognition for community contributions, and unexpectedly, her name. "Tonight," the principal said, "we're incredibly grateful to a parent who, though new to Maplewood, has already made a significant impact. Through quiet support and quiet kindness, she has reminded us that generosity doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. It often arrives in quiet choices and the willingness to simply show up." Vivian froze. The spotlight shifted. All eyes turned to her. The principal gestured toward the stage. "Vivian Hawthorne, would you mind saying a few words?" She hadn't prepared anything. She wasn't expecting this. But Daniel touched her hand and whispered, "You'll be great." So she stood, walked up the steps, and looked out at a sea of familiar, curious faces. Some kind, some guarded, some politely waiting to judge. She took a breath, then began. "I didn't come to Maplewood to stand in front of a microphone." A small ripple of laughter. "I came here to disappear a little, to give my son space, to find quiet where my life had gotten too loud." She paused, letting her eyes drift gently across the rows, past the moms who'd whispered, the dads who'd eyed Eli, the teachers who'd smiled with caution. "I've spent most of my adult life in boardrooms and backlit offices, places where everything is performance and nothing is truly personal, where your worth is measured in contracts, not character. And I was good at it. I built a life that looked perfect from the outside." Her voice didn't shake. It softened. "But then one day I looked around and realized I didn't remember the last time I laughed with my son, or walked outside without a calendar telling me I had somewhere else to be. So we packed up and came here." She looked at Daniel, then out into the crowd, past the cafeteria tables, the PTA bake sale banner, and finally toward Eli. "I thought I needed to be invisible for a while, but then I met people who reminded me that being seen, really seen, doesn't have to be scary." She paused. "And sometimes the people who show you the most about who you are the ones who don't care what you built. They only care how you treat the people you love." A hush fell over the room, not tense, just still, listening. "I want to say thank you to this town, to the teachers, to the kids, and especially to one man who, on a rainy afternoon, helped me not because of who I was, but because that's just who he is." Vivian smiled gently. "That kind of kindness stays with you." She stepped back, nodding once. The applause didn't explode. It unfolded, genuine, warm, lasting. Vivian returned to her seat, and Daniel squeezed her hand with a quiet kind of pride, the kind that didn't need words. After the ceremony, people lingered. A few parents approached her, some to say they hadn't known much about her, others just to say thank you. Even Claire Melrose came over and offered a half-hearted compliment about bravery before turning quickly to her phone. Vivian didn't need it to be more than it was, because Eli was still standing by the door, waiting. She walked to him slowly, the auditorium now half empty. The faint scent of cider and construction paper lingered in the air. Somewhere in the back, a janitor began stacking chairs. "You didn't have to say all that," Eli said, voice low. "I did," she replied. "Not for them. For me." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "It meant something." "To me too," she said, then added, "Thank you for showing up tonight." He looked at her. "Always." They stood in the quiet for a moment, the soft scrape of chairs and muted laughter echoing in the distance. "Daniel said something the other night," she said. "He said you help people feel safe. I think he's right." Eli smiled, shy but honest. Sometimes that's all we can do. Vivian tilted her head. I don't need perfect or certain. I just need steady. That, he said, I can be. She stepped closer, reaching for his hand. Not in ceremony, not in show, but in something real, simple, and warm. Their fingers laced together naturally. Not a performance, not a statement, just a beginning. Sunday morning came with a stillness that only small towns could hold. There were no horns, no clatter of city sidewalks, just the far-off sound of a church bell, the rustle of wind through nearly bare branches, and the occasional creak of a porch swing, shifting its weight with no one in it. Eli Turner stood in front of his bathroom mirror, shaving. His strokes were slow, almost ceremonial, careful lines carved through soft white foam. He rarely bothered to shave on Sundays. But today was different. He rinsed his face, toweled off, then reached for the brown corduroy jacket that had hung untouched in the back of his closet since Sophie's first-grade recital. It smelled faintly of cedar and old memories, but it still fit. He looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was older than he remembered, with tired eyes and a furrow in his brow that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But his hands were steady. And his heart, that was steadier than it had been in a long time. Vivian was already at the town square when he arrived. She stood near the baked goods table, arranging slices of pecan pie into little paper dishes. Her coat was long and camel-colored, her hair swept up in a loose bun. The autumn wind teased a strand loose near her cheek. Eli paused just a moment before walking toward her. Not because he doubted himself, but because sometimes even the good things deserved to be savored before they were spoken. Hey, he said. Vivian turned, and when she saw him, her eyes softened. You clean up well. Eli looked down at the jacket. Still smells like 2017, but it works. She smiled. I like it. They stood side by side for a moment, their breath rising in the cold, mingling in soft clouds. Around them, the Maplewood community bustled. Kids running past with pumpkin crafts, older couples sipping cider, neighbors sharing folding chairs and old stories. Sophie waved from across the green, holding Daniel's hand. The two of them had become inseparable in that effortless way children had. No labels, no questions, just trust. You ready for this? Vivian asked. Eli glanced sideways. For what? She tilted her head toward the small podium set up in the center of the park, where the town's mayor was preparing to announce a new round of local grants. I heard your garage is getting a bit of a spotlight today, she said. Jack Hartley nominated you for the Community Improvement Fund. Eli looked mildly horrified. He didn't. Oh, he did, Vivian's smile widened. And rumor has it, you're expected to say a few words. Eli groaned. I'd rather rewire an engine with my teeth. But before he could protest further, the mayor stepped up to the mic and called his name. Eli Turner, she said, voice cheerful and warm, who many of you know as the man who's kept our cars, snowblowers, and teenage sons' junk trucks running for over a decade, has not only provided honest work and open doors, but also offered quiet kindness to this town in ways that often go unnoticed. Today, we'd like to recognize him with a grant toward expanding his garage and keeping Turner's Auto open for years to come. The applause rose slowly, then built, genuine and full, the way only small towns can applaud when they mean it. Eli stood frozen. Then Vivian gently touched his elbow. Go on, she whispered. Be brave. He stepped up to the microphone, heart pounding, cleared his throat, looked out across a field of flannel shirts, mittens clutching hot cups, and familiar faces he'd fixed tires for, towed from ditches, or waved to from the same porch every morning. He began. I'm more comfortable under a hood than behind a microphone, so forgive me if I stumble. A chuckle rippled through the crowd. I've been part of this town my whole life. My dad ran Turner's before me. I used to sit on a milk crate beside him while he worked, handing him the wrong wrench more times than I can count. I never thought I'd end up doing the same thing. But here I am. He paused. For a while, I thought keeping things running was enough. You fix what's broken, you send folks on their way, and you go home. But then life broke in ways I couldn't fix. And I stopped believing in a lot of things, including the idea that good things could still happen after hard things. The crowd quieted. Even the wind seemed to hush. But recently, he continued, Someone reminded me that there's more to living than just getting by. That kindness isn't a favor. It's a way of life. And that sometimes you have to let people in, even if you're not sure what comes next. He looked out into the crowd and found her. Vivian. She stood just off to the side, arms folded across her chest, eyes full. I didn't expect to find much when I opened the door to help a stranger on a rainy afternoon, he said. But I did. I found possibility, and peace, and maybe even the start of something good. He stepped back. The applause came again, not louder this time, but fuller, more knowing. As he returned to the edge of the crowd, Vivian reached for his hand. You didn't stumble, she said. Felt like it. Sounded like a promise, she whispered, and I heard every word. That night, they walked down Maplewood's quiet main street together, children's laughter fading in the distance, windows aglow with soft light. And for once, Eli didn't feel like someone people whispered about behind closed doors. He felt known, not for what he fixed, but for what he had finally dared to say out loud. Snow came softly that year. It started as a whisper, fine powder drifting down from a sky the color of worn cotton. By morning, Maplewood lay tucked beneath a blanket of white, rooftops rounded, branches laced with delicate frost, and every sound muffled into a kind of quiet that made people pause before speaking. In the middle of it all, Turner's Auto Repair glowed like a lantern. The new wooden sign, freshly carved, freshly painted, read Turner and Hawthorne Garage. Honest work, warm hands. Vivian had protested the name at first, said she didn't need it on the building. But Eli had insisted, not for vanity, for truth. Because whether you like it or not, he'd said, grinning, you fix something here too. That morning, the garage wasn't open for business. The tools were tucked away, the bays were empty. Instead, a string of Edison bulbs crisscrossed the rafters, and folding tables held trays of cookies, mugs of cocoa, and a few slightly lopsided gingerbread houses that Sophie had helped decorate. It was a celebration. Quiet, simple, theirs. Sophie twirled in the middle of the floor in a sparkly red dress, Daniel chasing her with a plastic snowflake he claimed gave him ice powers. Vivian watched from a corner, holding a mug of cider, cheeks pink from the cold. Eli approached, wiping his hands on a dish towel. You approve? She looked around. It's perfect. He glanced toward the makeshift decorations. Sophie's responsible for the glitter explosion. She's got vision, Vivian said, smiling. Eli leaned against the counter beside her. So, Christmas plans? Vivian glanced at him. I was thinking something small. Dinner. Just us. His eyes warmed. Us sounds good. Then after a moment, you know, I never thought my life would stretch this far again. After Claire passed, I thought that part of me went with her. Vivian didn't interrupt. I wasn't sure I could love anyone without feeling like I was betraying what we had. She turned to him gently. You're not replacing her. I know, he said, voice steady. You're not a replacement. You're something new, something I didn't think I deserved, but I'm learning to accept anyway. She reached for his hand. We both are. As the afternoon wore on, neighbors stopped by, dropping off cookies, laughing with Sophie, shaking Eli's hand. No one whispered anymore. Not because the town had changed, but because he had. They had. When people walk through fire together and come out carrying something whole, others notice. Later, as twilight fell and the bulbs overhead cast a warm glow on the snow just outside the bay doors, Sophie insisted on one last dance. Mom danced at the gala, she said, hands on her hips. Now it's your turn, Daddy. Eli groaned. I knew this was coming. Vivian set down her mug. I'm not letting you off the hook this time. Daniel queued up the music, something slow and sweet from his mom's old playlist, and Sophie clapped her hands in triumph as Eli took Vivian's hand and led her, awkwardly but earnestly, to the center of the floor. They swayed slowly, the music a soft echo behind them. Eli's hand found the small of her back. Vivian rested her head lightly against his chest. You still think you're not a dancer? She asked. I think I'm better when I've got the right partner. Vivian smiled against his shirt. Well, you're stuck with me now. I know, he whispered, and I'm not going anywhere. Around them, the world continued quietly. Children's laughter, the creak of the garage door swaying in the breeze, the rustle of snow on the roof, and the sound of two hearts, weathered, healing, finding their rhythm. Later, as the evening drew down and the last guest waved goodbye, Eli and Vivian stood at the entrance of the garage, watching the snow fall under the amber glow of the street lamp. "You ever think," Eli said, voice hushed, "that a dance could change your life?" Vivian looked up at him. "I think kindness did. The dance just helped me notice." He smiled, then reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small box. Her breath caught, but when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a key. To the garage, to the house, to him. Vivian stared at it, then at him. "I don't want to rush anything," he said quickly. I want you to know you're welcome. In every room, every part, no locks." She reached for it, fingers curling around the cold metal. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. He leaned down, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and behind them Daniel and Sophie sat on the old workbench, feet swinging, watching as the two people they loved most finally stopped waiting for permission to be happy. That night the snow deepened. The lights in Maplewood dimmed one by one, but in the small garage at the edge of town, a warm yellow glow still poured through the window. Not from a work lamp, not from an engine light, but from a place that had once been just a building and had become at last a home. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and how did this story make you feel? If this touched your heart or reminded you of something meaningful in your own life, let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts truly matter here. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories filled with warmth, hope, and second chances, feel free to subscribe to the channel. We'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for spending your time here. See you in the next story.